Join me as I dig deep into the mystery of what really happened to Father Stanley Rother, America's first martyr. Can I uncover the truth behind his incredible story? Father Stanley Rother was a Catholic priest from Oklahoma who made the ultimate sacrifice while serving in Guatemala. His story is one of faith, resilience, and courage in the face of extreme adversity. Born in 1935, Father Rother was ordained as a priest in 1963 and went on to serve in the impoverished region of Santiago Atitlán, Guatemala. As he began his missionary work, Father Rother was met with significant challenges. Guatemala was plagued by civil war, and the local clergy were often targeted by the military and paramilitary groups. Despite these risks, Father Rother persevered, determined to bring hope and spiritual guidance to the people. He quickly gained the trust and affection of the locals, who appreciated his dedication and compassion. The situation in Guatemala continued to deteriorate, with violence and unrest escalating throughout the 1980s. Father Rother's presence was seen as a threat to the authorities, who viewed him as a potential supporter of leftist rebels. As tensions rose, Father Rother became increasingly concerned for his safety, but he refused to abandon the people he had come to love. In 1981, Father Rother received death threats and was warned to leave Guatemala, but he chose to stay with his flock. His decision would ultimately seal his fate. On July 28, 1981, armed men stormed the parish house, and Father Rother was dragged outside and shot. The events leading up to Father Rother's martyrdom were marked by his tireless work with the local community. He built a school, a radio station, and provided medical care to the people. His dedication earned him the nickname Padre Stanley and made him a beloved figure in the region. The impact of Father Rother's assassination was felt deeply by the community, who mourned the loss of their spiritual leader. His death served as a rallying cry for the Guatemalan Church and highlighted the plight of persecuted clergy around the world. The pivotal moment of Father Rother's assassination sent shockwaves through the Catholic community, both in Guatemala and in the United States. It marked a turning point in the country's struggle for human rights and brought attention to the plight of missionaries working in hostile environments. The legacy of Father Stanley Rother lives on, inspiring countless people with his courage and conviction. He was beatified in 2015 and canonized as a saint in 2022, becoming the first American martyr to be recognized by the Catholic Church. If you're moved by Father Rother's incredible story, share your thoughts in the comments below. If you're interested in more stories of faith and resilience, be sure to check out another video on my channel about similar topics. In the heart of America's Great Plains, where the wind whispers through endless fields of wheat, a humble boy named Stanley Francis Rother was born on March 27, 1935. Okarche, Oklahoma, was a small farming community, its rhythms dictated by the seasons and the steadfast faith of its people. The Rother family, devout German-American Catholics, raised Stanley and his siblings with a deep sense of duty, rooted in the teachings of the Church and the toil of the land. Stanley's childhood was one of simplicity and purpose. He worked alongside his father, Frank, tending crops and livestock, learning the value of perseverance. His mother, Gertrude, instilled in him a love for prayer and community, often leading the family in the rosary. The local parish, Holy Trinity Catholic Church, was the cornerstone of Okarche life, and it was here that Stanley first felt the stirrings of a higher calling. As a teenager, he confided in his pastor, expressing a desire to serve God as a priest, a decision that would shape not only his life but the lives of countless others across continents. After graduating high school, Stanley entered St. John's Seminary in San Antonio, Texas. the path to priesthood was not without challenges. He struggled with Latin, a required subject, and faced academic setbacks that tested his resolve. Yet, his determination mirrored the resilience of the Oklahoma farmers he grew up with. In 1963, after years of study and spiritual formation, Stanley was ordained a priest for the Archdiocese of Oklahoma City. His ordination mass, held in Okarche, was a moment of pride for his family and community, who saw in him a reflection of their shared values. Father Rother's early years as a priest were spent in parishes across Oklahoma and Texas, where he earned a reputation for his approachability and work ethic. He was not a man of grand gestures but of quiet, steady service, whether celebrating Mass, visiting the sick, or helping with community projects. Yet, something deeper stirred within him. In 1968, when the Archdiocese responded to Pope John XII's call for missionaries to serve in Latin America, Father Rother volunteered without hesitation. He was assigned to Santiago Atitlán, a remote village in Guatemala, nestled in the volcanic highlands beside Lake Atitlán. The transition from Oklahoma's plains to Guatemala's rugged terrain was stark. Santiago Atitlán was home to the Tz'utujil people, an indigenous Mayan community with a rich cultural heritage but also profound challenges. Poverty was rampant, infrastructure was scarce, and the region was increasingly unstable due to political tensions. For Father Rother, this was not a deterrent but an invitation. He arrived in 1968, a 33-year-old priest with a farmer's hands and a missionary's heart, ready to serve a people he would come to love as his own. This is the story of Father Stanley Rother, not a saint in the abstract, but a man of flesh and blood, whose courage and faith would lead him to become America's first martyr. His life, marked by sacrifice and solidarity, began in the fields of Oklahoma but found its ultimate purpose in the mountains of Guatemala. As we journey through his story, we'll uncover the man behind the martyr, the shepherd who refused to run, even when danger loomed. Father Rother's mission was not just to preach but to live among the Tz'utujil, to share their joys and sorrows. In doing so, he became more than a priest, he became a brother, a friend, and, ultimately, a symbol of unwavering love. Let's step into his world, where faith met action, and where a quiet Oklahoma priest would leave an indelible mark on history. When Father Stanley Rother arrived in Santiago Atitlán in 1968, he stepped into a world both beautiful and broken. The village, perched on the shores of Lake Atitlán and surrounded by towering volcanoes, was a place of breathtaking natural splendor. The Tz'utujil people, descendants of the ancient Maya, wore vibrant, hand-woven clothing and maintained traditions that stretched back centuries. Yet, beneath this beauty lay stark realities: limited access to education, healthcare, and economic opportunity, compounded by the growing shadow of Guatemala's political unrest. Father Rother, or Padre Aplas as the Tz'utujil would affectionately call him, a nod to his Tz'utujil name, approached his mission with humility. He was not there to impose but to learn, to listen, and to serve. One of his first priorities was to master the languages of his new home. He studied Spanish diligently, but recognizing the importance of the Tz'utujil language to the community, he also immersed himself in its complex grammar and pronunciation. This effort was more than linguistic, it was a gesture of respect, a way to bridge the gap between an outsider and a community wary of foreigners. His linguistic work culminated in a monumental achievement, translating the New Testament into Tz'utujil. This was no small feat in a language that had rarely been written down. Working alongside local leaders, Father Rother ensured that the scriptures were accessible in the heart language of the people, allowing them to encounter the gospel in a deeply personal way. The translation process also fostered collaboration, as community members contributed their knowledge, creating a sense of shared ownership over the project. Beyond his spiritual contributions, Father Rother was a practical servant. He saw the needs of Santiago Atitlán and responded with action. He helped establish a radio station to broadcast educational programs, teaching everything from literacy to agricultural techniques. He supported the creation of a hospital, ensuring better healthcare access for a community where medical care was often a distant dream. He even rolled up his sleeves to work in the fields, planting crops alongside farmers and sharing his Oklahoma farming know-how. His approach was holistic. Faith was not separate from daily life but woven into it. Father Rother's presence transformed the parish of St. James the Apostle. The church became a hub of activity, not just for worship but for community life. He celebrated masses that blended Catholic liturgy with Tz'utujil traditions, respecting the cultural heritage of his flock. Children flocked to him, drawn by his gentle humor and willingness to play. Elders respected him for his fairness and compassion. To the Tz'utujil, Padre Aplas was not just a priest but a member of their extended family. Yet, even as he built these bonds, the world around Santiago Atitlán was growing darker. Guatemala in the 1970s was a nation on edge, caught in the grip of a brutal civil war. The conflict, pitting the military government against leftist guerrillas, spilled into rural communities like Santiago Atitlán. The Tz'utujil, caught in the crossfire, faced suspicion from both sides. Father Rother's work, rooted in empowering the marginalized, began to draw attention from those who saw his efforts as a threat. Despite the rising tensions, Father Rother remained steadfast. He lived simply, sharing the hardships of his people. His rectory was modest. His meals were the same corn tortillas and beans eaten by the villagers. He drove a beat-up truck, often loaded with supplies or people needing a ride. His life was a testament to solidarity, a priest who chose to walk with his flock, no matter the cost. As the decade drew to a close, the violence crept closer. Friends and parishioners began to disappear. Father Rother's name appeared on death lists circulated by shadowy groups. Yet, he refused to abandon his mission. In a letter to his family, he wrote, "The shepherd cannot run at the first sign of danger. I belong here with my people." These words would define his legacy, a legacy forged in the crucible of faith and courage. By the late 1970s, Guatemala was a nation unraveling. The Civil War, which had simmered for decades, erupted into a full-scale conflict that left no corner of the country untouched. The government, backed by the military, waged a brutal campaign against suspected insurgents, often targeting indigenous communities like the Tz'utujil. Guerrilla groups, fighting for reform, retaliated with their own violence, creating a climate of fear and mistrust. For the people of Santiago Atitlán, life became a delicate balance of survival, where every action could be misinterpreted, every allegiance questioned. Father Stanley Rother found himself at the heart of this storm. His work, empowering the Tz'utujil through education, healthcare, and faith, made him a beloved figure among the villagers but a target for those who equated community organization with rebellion. The military viewed any form of indigenous mobilization with suspicion, and Father Rother's efforts to uplift his parish were seen by some as subversive. Meanwhile, guerrilla groups pressured villagers to join their cause, creating further divisions. The violence began to encroach on Santiago Atitlán. Families mourned loved ones who vanished in the night, their fates unknown. Missing persons posters appeared on the walls of the village, a grim reminder of the cost of the conflict. Father Rother documented these disappearances, keeping meticulous records of the atrocities to bear witness to the suffering of his people. He wrote letters to church authorities and human rights organizations, pleading for intervention, but the world seemed deaf to the cries of rural Guatemala. As the danger grew, so did the threats against Father Rother himself. His name appeared on death lists, circulated by paramilitary groups known as death squads. These shadowy organizations, often linked to the military, targeted anyone perceived as a threat to the status quo. Priests, teachers, and community leaders were prime targets. Colleagues urged Father Rother to leave, warning that his life was at risk. Even his family in Oklahoma, hearing of the escalating violence, begged him to return home. Yet, Father Rother's resolve only deepened. In a letter to a friend, he reflected, "This is my home now. These are my people. If I leave, who will stay to help them?" His words echoed the gospel he preached, particularly the parable of the Good Shepherd, who lays down his life for his sheep. For Father Rother, abandoning his flock was unthinkable, even as the wolves closed in. The atmosphere in Santiago Atitlán grew heavier with each passing day. Villagers whispered of strangers lurking in the shadows, of soldiers questioning neighbors about the priest. Father Rother continued his work, celebrating Mass, visiting families, and supporting the community's efforts to survive. But the strain was evident. He confided in close friends about the fear he felt, not for himself but for the Tz'utujil, who faced retaliation for their association with him. In the face of such darkness, Father Rother's faith shone brighter. He believed that God had called him to this moment, to stand with the oppressed, to be a light in the midst of despair. His courage inspired those around him, even as it placed him in the crosshairs of a violence he could not escape. The night of July 28, 1981, was quiet in Santiago Atitlán, the kind of stillness that masks a gathering storm. In the rectory of St. James the Apostle Church, Father Stanley Rother was preparing for bed. The day had been long, filled with the usual demands of his ministry, Mass, meetings, and visits to families. But the weight of the threats against him lingered, a constant undercurrent in his life. Around 1 a.m., the silence was shattered. 3 armed men, their faces masked, forced their way into the rectory. They were not there to intimidate or warn, they had come to kill. Father Rother, awakened by the intrusion, faced his attackers with a calm resolve. Witnesses later recounted that he resisted, not out of fear for his own life but to protect others in the rectory. He shouted, urging a young man hiding nearby to escape. In the struggle, Father Rother was shot twice, his body collapsing in the room where he had prayed and worked for 13 years. The news of his death spread like wildfire through Santiago Atitlán. By dawn, villagers gathered outside the church, their grief raw and palpable. Women wept openly, men stood in stunned silence, and children clutched the hands of their parents, trying to comprehend the loss of their beloved Padre Aplas. The Tz'utujil insisted that Father Rother's heart remain with them, a symbol of his unbreakable bond with their community. His heart was buried beneath the altar of St. James the Apostle, while his body was returned to Oklahoma for burial. Father Rother's assassination was one of 10 priestly murders in Guatemala that year, a grim statistic in a war that claimed countless lives. The killers, widely believed to be members of a death squad, were never brought to justice. Yet, the impact of his death reverberated far beyond the highlands of Guatemala. In Okarche, his family mourned a son and brother whose faith had led him to a distant land. In the broader Catholic Church, his sacrifice sparked renewed attention to the persecution of clergy in Latin America. Father Rother's death was not the end of his story but the beginning of a new chapter. The Tz'utujil honored him as a martyr, a man who gave everything for love of God and neighbor. His rectory, once a place of life and laughter, became a shrine, a place of pilgrimage for those seeking to touch the legacy of a priest who embodied Christ's call to serve the least of these. The murder of Father Stanley Rother could have been a footnote in the tragic history of Guatemala's civil war, but his life and death were too extraordinary to fade into obscurity. In the years following his assassination, his story spread, carried by those who knew him and those inspired by his witness. The Tz'utujil kept his memory alive, retelling stories of Padre Apla's kindness and courage. In Oklahoma, his family and the archdiocese began the long process of seeking official recognition of his martyrdom. The Catholic Church's path to sainthood is rigorous, requiring evidence of heroic virtue and, in the case of martyrs, proof of death for the faith. Father Rother's cause was opened in 2007, with the Archdiocese of Oklahoma City gathering testimonies from the Tz'utujil, fellow priests, and others who knew him. These accounts painted a portrait of a man whose life was marked by selflessness and whose death was a direct result of his refusal to abandon his flock. In 2016, Pope Francis declared Father Rother a martyr, recognizing that he was killed in odium fidei, in hatred of the faith. This paved the way for his beatification, a significant step toward sainthood. On September 23, 2017, a joyous ceremony was held in Oklahoma City, attended by thousands, including Tz'utujil pilgrims who traveled from Guatemala. Father Rother was declared blessed, the first U.S.-born priest and martyr to receive this honor. The event was a moment of unity, bridging the plains of Oklahoma and the highlands of Guatemala in celebration of a shared hero. The Blessed Stanley Rother Shrine, completed in Oklahoma City in 2023, stands as a testament to his enduring legacy. Designed in a Spanish colonial style, the shrine reflects the cultural fusion of Father Rother's life. Its centerpiece is a reliquary containing his relics, a place of prayer and reflection for pilgrims. The shrine also houses a museum, chronicling his life from Okarche to Santiago Atitlán, with artifacts like his Tz'utujil New Testament and personal letters. For the faithful, it is a sacred space, a reminder that holiness can emerge from the most ordinary beginnings. Father Rother's beatification also sparked renewed interest in his story worldwide. Books, documentaries, and articles have explored his life, drawing parallels to other missionary martyrs like Saint Oscar Romero. His example has inspired vocations to the priesthood and missionary work, particularly among young Catholics in the United States. In Guatemala, the parish of St. James the Apostle continues to thrive, a living legacy of the priest who gave his life for its people. Blessed Stanley Rother's life challenges us to consider what it means to live for others. He was not a man of grand ambitions but of simple, steadfast love. His martyrdom was not a single act but the culmination of a life poured out in service. Today, as pilgrims light candles at his shrine and Tz'utujil children learn of the priest who loved their ancestors, his spirit endures, a beacon of hope in a world still in need of shepherds who will not run. The story of Blessed Stanley Rother is not confined to the pages of history or the walls of a shrine. It is a living narrative, carried in the hearts of those who pray for his intercession, who find courage in his example, and who strive to live with the same selfless love. From the fields of Okarche to the shores of Lake Atitlán, his life traced a path of faith that continues to guide others. For the Tz'utujil, Padre Aplas remains a beloved figure, a priest who saw their dignity and fought for their future. In Oklahoma, he is a hometown hero, proof that sainthood can spring from the soil of small-town America. For the global church, he is a martyr whose sacrifice speaks to the universal call to serve the marginalized, no matter the cost. As we reflect on Father Rother's life, we are invited to ask ourselves, what does it mean to be a shepherd in our own time? His answer was clear: stay with the flock, share their burdens, and trust in God's providence. His legacy challenges us to live with that same courage, to be present in the places where love and justice are most needed. Blessed Stanley Rother, America's first martyr, reminds us that holiness is not found in escaping danger but in embracing it for the sake of others. As pilgrims light candles at his shrine and the Tz'utujil sing hymns in his honor, his light shines on, a testament to the power of a life given fully to God. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the life of an unseen saint. May Blessed Stanley Rother's story inspire you to live with faith, courage, and love, wherever your path may lead.